Unlocking GA4 using the power of measurement strategy. So in our time together, that's kind of what we're going to talk about, because I think there's a lot of challenges with GA4 that's sort of on the tactical side, but the big challenge is nobody's using the proper strategy. So let's talk about that. As Phil had mentioned, it's our job to sort of help people that are working with numbers to make more sense of the numbers. So we train both measurement strategy at our company at MeasurementMarketing.io, as well as the tactical stuff of how to use the tools through one of our products, which is called the Measurement Marketing Academy. It's kind of like our DIY program. Now, with all of our trainings, we always focus on one thing because there's a lot to this stuff, including strategy. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces for this. And I'm going to go through all of it. So everyone's going to get that here. But just focus on one new thing. So either a piece of the strategy that maybe you're not doing where you're like, hey, this is the piece we need to add. You start taking action on that. It's what we call riding the bike. But you got to take action on that, build that as a skill, because otherwise you've just been exposed to new information. It's not a skill until you practice it. So pick one thing, practice it. Then you can come back, rewatch, and pick up other one things as you go through this again. This is one of those talks that'll just keep on giving the more that you watch it. Now we're going to focus on two main things. One is just the mindset to make sure everyone's sort of at the base camp in terms of how to think about measurement, especially in your organization, because you might be thinking about like this. Maybe your organization's not. This is a different way to talk to them about it. And then we'll go into the actual strategy itself and break that down. And then we'll have some time for Q&A with any luck at the end. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start with this. What's going on right now? Well, not a really trick question, just a couple people chatting, right? What about here? Same thing, just a couple people chatting, a couple people technically having a conversation, right? What about here? Same thing, conversation. But when you think about the conversation, what's actually happening is somebody is hopefully listening while somebody is responding. And then it kind of goes back and forth. Just like if you and I were in a room together, we would be having a natural conversation. I would be saying something, you'd be hearing me and changing what you're going to do based upon what I say to you and vice versa, right? I would adjust my side of the conversation to hopefully keep a nice, productive conversation going. So it's just listening and responding. That's all a conversation is. Now, when you think about this photo, right, this particular image, this is a little bit closer to home for many of us because this is still a conversation. It's still just listening and responding, but it's a little bit more e-commerce oriented, right? It's a little bit more transactional in this case. You've got the salesperson who's trying to help this customer, hopefully purchase some sort of golf equipment, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for. It's just the sales conversation that's happening of just listening and responding. All of this makes sense in the offline world. Listening and responding. You're with me so far, hopefully. But what about this? So now we go into the digital world and what's going on? Where's the listening, right? Where is that happening? There's very little listening going on in this case. How? Why? Well, because there's not somebody there. It makes sense. I can't possibly listen. So all the website's doing is responding. In other words, websites just throwing up marketing messages, trying to get somebody to move through a particular user journey. But we really want this. We want that listening and responding conversation, because if this salesperson talked to this customer when they first came in and said, hey, how can I help you? And the customer's like, well, I'm looking for a baseball hat, right? A little golf cap. So, which makes more sense at a golf store. They would be over by the golf caps that are in the background there. They wouldn't be over by the drivers that are sitting here, right? We want to be able to use our websites to have a conversation with the users. But the very first set, when it comes to the mindset of this, is that they're realizing there is a conversation already happening between the website and the users, because you can't be there. That makes sense to us, hopefully. You can't be there physically talking to every single user. But your website it is having a conversation. If you think about it, you go to any website, you're probably hearing the website's words in your head as you go through and you sort of sub-vocalize your way through it. So you're having a conversation with different websites. Your website is having a conversation with different people, and we're ignoring it as digital marketers for the most part. Why? Because we're not thinking about that conversation. We're not realizing that conversation's there, or worse, we thought about it and then we're like, well, we can't hear that, so we're out of here. So how do we listen? That's the beauty of measurement. The better we get at measurement, the better we are at listening to their side of the conversation. And then, of course, what do we do from that? We market. Marketing is how we respond in that conversation, because obviously we can't be there. So that's the whole concept behind MeasurementMarketing.io. And that's why we have our website, right? MeasurementMarketing.io is really just listening and responding, but it's using the power of measurement to do that. So when you are in your organization, and hopefully that's kind of a one thing already for some organizations, ask, are we listening to the conversation? That's all we talk about. We talk about the different user journeys, what the user journeys are, and is it the conversation we're supposed to be having with them, right? When you start asking questions like this, you very quickly move into a whole different mindset around measurement being a department and no longer a project. And many of you might be familiar with this back in the old days of universal analytics and basically even classic analytics before that. There wasn't really much measurement. mean, that was practically just a step above hit counters. And so you could just kind of set up your goals in Google Analytics and then let it go. And you have your reports and everybody chooses the same thing over and over again. That's gone, right? Measurement is a department. It needs resources. It needs time. It needs training. It needs budget. It needs tools. It needs strategy. It is a department now in an organization. It's not just a one and done sort of setup project. So let's talk about kind of how strategy fits in. This is something we call tool versus trade. I'm trying to learn how to cook. And so I notice, well, they have a pretty fancy oven back there. They've got these pretty fancy ladles back there. Look at these fancy tools that they have. I know why I can't cook like this person because I don't have all the fancy tools out of that tool, right? So tools absolutely will not save you, but a strategy will. Strategy should dictate your tools, not the other way around, right? Strategy should be in charge. So let's talk about that strategy, and then we're going to go through this in pretty good detail. And like I said, I'll handle questions at the end of this for anybody that's got them. All right. So the framework is a pretty simple framework. It's just 3 simple steps, right? We're going to plan things out. We're going to build things out with our measurement, and then we're going to launch it, actually start using our measurement systems. Now, as with all things, it matters how you do this. That is the secret sauce. And so we're going to get into that. First, let's talk about sort of why this exists. This exists because we saw there was a problem. Most marketers are kind of marketing in the blind. Most marketing departments are marketing in the blind. They are just guessing for the most part. Some of them what I call professional guessing, meaning they'll buy training that teaches them how to guess, or they'll join masterminds that teach them that basically other people guess for them, right? But they're just guessing. They're not using data. And there's a lot of frustration in organizations, especially for those of us as numbers people here, where you're like, okay, I know they have these answers, but they're just not using them, right? Too much data, not enough action is what happens in a lot of organizations. And it causes marketers to guess, right? These marketing teams to guess. We don't want that. What we want is a system that just going through and taking the activities in the system, going through the different actions in the system, they naturally produce the results we want. In most organizations, that's some sort of growth metric like revenue and profits. So you want to use a strategy that just by going through the individual steps, you're more than likely to produce the results that you want as a symptom of that system, right? So how do we do that? The first step is in the plan. And the first key in this planning step is asking questions. Now, this is the step I think that most people overcomplicate. So we're going to come back to the secret sauce of how to ask questions here, but you sort of list out all the questions that you're trying to get answers to. Then we're going to gather the information needed to collect those answers. That's where all of us come in as measurement marketers, people that are using these tools, because we can figure out, okay, I need to do this with GA4, this particular event with this particular parameter, and I'm gonna make this a custom dimension and all this other fun stuff and show it in Looker Studio or BigQuery, whatever it is. So that's the information stage. And then, and this is the most important key of this particular step, we are thinking about, technically, they are thinking about, whoever the end user is thinking about the actions they're going to take when they get the answer, right? And again, we're going to go into why that's so important in a second. So once you have that, then you go into the results. You actually start using the tool and you make sure that it knows, in this case, we're going to talk about GA4. So you got to make sure that Google Analytics 4 understands the results you're trying to achieve, right? And again, we're going to go into specifics of that. Then it has to know where the traffic is coming from, which makes sense. That's the UTM magic. Then if you properly understand and have properly configured Google Analytics 4, you will see a natural story start to appear that tells you which particular traffic sources, or which particular ad sets, or which particular clicks coming from those, your traffic coming through are more likely to cause certain results that you want. And you can start to sort of understand the jigsaw puzzle that is traffic and multi-touch attribution. Because you can start to see, oh, maybe Google Organic is really good at creating some sort of awareness signal for us, but the emails, those are the things that close the deal. So, you can kind of see how things start to work, and you start to see a natural story appear. At that point, your builds are done and you move into actually giving these reports to everybody so they can start using it. So what are they supposed to do with the reports? Well, they're supposed to listen. What are we listening for? The conversation. That's the whole point of this. We want to understand the conversation between the users and the website, all the different journeys that we have that are going through. Is it the conversation we are supposed to be having? Is the website having the conversation it's supposed to be having? That's where the forecasts come in. And that's another huge thing that people miss. They don't have a forecast. They're too busy forensically going over their data, trying to figure out what happened last week when they should be talking about what's going to happen next week. And that's the beauty of measurement. It'll tell you what's working. It'll tell you what's not, but measurement done incredibly well will tell you what's coming next. And that's where the real power is when you set up a proper strategy. So with your forecast, you of course measure against your forecast when you have that set up. And that's what will automatically dump you at this place where you can invest. It sort of says, hey, this is the piece, this is the lever that more than likely, there's no guarantees, we get that in the world of measurement, but this is the place where more than likely, if you take actions around this particular spot, you're going to move the needle, right? This is where you should invest your resources and fix some things. And that's the optimization step. And if you think about it, that's the thing that everybody tries to skip to, right? They don't want to plan. They don't really do good builds. They just sort of turn this thing on and light it up and it gets a bunch of data. Then they jump into it and they start to try to use it so they can optimize. And of course, they're not going to be able to do that because it hasn't been properly configured, hasn't been properly planned out. Right. So that's the optimization step. And of course, when you do that, you just sort of rinse and repeat. You go through the framework over and over and over again. The only difference between where any of you are now and me is that I've gone through this thousands of times at this point. Right. That's it. I've got a little bit more measurement muscle. Every time you go through this, you gain a little bit more measurement muscle. You get better at the strategy. You start opening up the tools. You start using different tools, right, to expand and answer the questions that you're asking. So let's go through this in a little bit more detail, and then we'll wrap it up and go into Q&A. So in this planning step, and I cannot emphasize this enough, try to keep things simple. I think it's easy to complicate things. I don't think that's a particularly impressive skill because everything wants to be complicated. All systems want to go into chaos. That's kind of what they do. The skill is keeping things simple. So when you think about questions, just think about this. There are only ever two types of questions you can ever ask. There are results questions and there are how questions, and that's it. Every question you ask comes down to one of those two. So the results question are things like, if you think about the user journey that your users are going through, what's the end result I'm trying to get from that journey? In other words, from that particular conversation, what is the end result I'm trying to get? And then that's a question, right? So that could be something you're probably already asking. Things like, how much did we sell? How many units did we sell? What was the revenue amount? What was the average cart value, right? All of that sort of stuff. Maybe it's a lead type conversation. So how many leads did we get, right? All that sort of stuff are the results style questions. The more important questions, those are still important. You still got to ask them. But the more important questions are the how questions. So we think, okay, well, how did I get that result? How many product detail page views did I see? How many of those added to cart? How many of those began checkout? How many of those completed? Well, so now I know if I'm not getting the result, I can start to understand how, what broke. And there's a lot of companies that make the mistake of having that poisonous thought of, I don't care as long as it's working. I don't care how it's working. That is such a mistake because I promise you, the second it breaks, you will very much care how it's working. And you won't know because you never thought to measure it. And that's important. So you have to understand how you are failing if that's the case. But more importantly, if you're successful, you got to know how you're being successful so that you can start to replicate that and learn from it and understand the conversation. And if you think about it, why would you ignore the conversation happening between the user and the website? It seems ridiculous when you're aware of it, right? That's the power of measurement. We can listen for it. So we list all these questions down, these results and how questions. Don't worry about the right results and how questions. When you're starting out, any results and how questions are perfect. Every time you do this, you're coming back with a little bit more skill from the time before. So you naturally start getting better. You naturally start understanding how to ask results and how questions. You get better every time you do it. So just start and then come back and you keep doing it and you get better and better. It's a natural thing. Now with information, we sort of switch this around because in our business, it's really easy to get into the data and the metrics and everything else. And that is important, obviously. But we think about the information more from a behavior standpoint. What behaviors do I need to measure for? In other words, because that's kind of how we understand the conversation from the user side. It's all the behaviors they're leaving behind as they interact with our websites, right? Or apps or whatever it is that we're trying to measure for. So what are the different behaviors that would tell me that they achieved that result? What are the behaviors that would tell me that they've achieved the how question, right? Whatever the thing is I'm trying to measure for. So it could be a very simple opt-in rate question. I need to know what my opt-in rate is. Great. Okay. Well, how would we know that? Well, we're going to have to measure the people that come into the main offer for the opt-in. And then of course, the thank you page, that fulfillment step for the opt-in. And I can divide those out and know my opt-in rate. Okay, perfect. But I'm measuring for those behaviors of page views, right? Coming through. It might be a generate lead event you're dividing it by, right? But you think in terms of behaviors. Then it's the actions. This is the most important key of this step. This is the thing that is skipped more often. I think purely out of ignorance for the most part. They just don't realize they should be doing it. But once you kind of see this, you go like, wow, that makes a ton of sense. Think about the actions. And this is more important for the stakeholder, the person who's going to be actually using this. Think about the actions, and you should know, you have to know this if you're a measurement professional. What are they going to do if the answer comes in lower than what they think it's going to be, if the answer comes in higher than they think it's going to be, or if it's just right in the sweet spot. So I might suggest, going back to that opt-in example, well, my opt-in rate is going to be anywhere between 25 and 35%. That's where it should be for this particular offer. Okay, great. What if it comes in less than 25%? Well, in that case, I might look at the offer itself. I'm going to look at the ad copy, see if there's a specific traffic source or ad set that maybe isn't working compared to others. But if they're all kind of doing that, I know it's an offer issue. We're going to start working on that. Okay, cool. That's the action we're going to take. Now, this is before we even set up measurement, before we open up a spreadsheet, before we look at GA4, before you open up that Looker Studio report. You're thinking about this. Then you go, okay, well, let's say it's higher than 35%. What might you do? Well, if it comes in maybe say higher than 40%, I might start going, well, that's performing too well. And that's a thing in conversion rates, right? All of us should know that. It's like a conversion rate that's too high could be a sign of something that's not quite working. So that might be that I'm not scaling the audience the way I want to. And maybe that's a little bit too warm of an audience. And I've got some room where I can expand out targeting. And then, yeah, that number will drop down a little bit, but I'll net more leads, let's say. That's the action I might take with that. What if it's between 25 and 35%? What if it's in that sweet spot? What will we do? Well, then I'm going to try to slowly scale the traffic, keeping it within that range, and maybe try to do some other traffic sources. We're going to bring in some Google ads instead and add it to the Facebook or add in TikTok, and try to get it that way too. All right, perfect. Now we've got our actions, right? So essentially in our planning stage, we know the questions we're trying to answer. We're collecting the information to get the answers, and we already know what we're going to do when we see the number. That is such an important step. How many times have you been asked by somebody, what's the information about whatever question they're trying to answer, and it's staring at them in the report, but they don't see it, right? Well, the reason they don't see it is because they haven't role played it. So that's what we do with our stakeholders, with our clients, with anybody that we're working with reports. We teach our students to do this with theirs, is to go through and sort of whiteboard out. Okay, well, if the dashboard looked like this, if the number was here, well, what would you do if it was lower? What would you do if it was higher? What would you do if it's just right? Because all of a sudden you start understanding how they're going to use that measurement, and that can change the information you collect. Because the second I say, listen, I'm going to start breaking it down by traffic source, and actually, you know what, by ad, I want it broken down by ad so I can see if there's a particular ad that might have a problem. I start going, okay, I got to change how I'm UTMing stuff because I got to make sure I can split it down by that, right? And so now I'm changing the quality of how I measure and what I collect in that information stage to make sure that they can take the proper action they want to take, assuming it's for somebody else. It's a very important step. With all of that in place, and only when that's done, then you move into your build. So in the build, the first thing we do is we start with results because they're the easiest things to set up in a platform like GA4. And I'm going to kind of speak specifically to just using GA4 at this point. So you would set up what we call ACE results. So ACE stands for three things: awareness. And I think about this always in terms of the user journey. We all have multiple user journeys in our companies. There's brand user journey. There are user journeys that are for every single product and service that we have, or categories of products you might have, but there's lots of user journeys you can measure for. So we think about, okay, what's the behavior I'm going to measure for, that result I'm trying to get when they're aware of the journey that I want them to be aware of. In other words, when they've started the conversation. I measure when they've completed the conversation. That's the C part of ACE, right? So aware and complete. And then I measure as they engage along the way. Sometimes just one little measurement, sometimes many. It depends how long that journey is. But the whole concept is you can start to see that results in how methodology coming into play here. I'm measuring for the stages of the journey. So not only do I understand how many times they completed that journey I wanted them to complete, like a purchase or a lead or whatever the final action is, I'm actually measuring along the way so I see where the drop-off is, right? So that's an important step. Now, the next thing is with traffic, this is just the old-fashioned UTMs, right? Those UTMs we know and love. And we really just want to make sure that it identifies the who, what, and why. And of course, there's a ton of different other things you can do, marketing tactic now and everything else that's available. But keep it simple. Who is sending me traffic? What type of traffic are they sending me? And what is the purpose of this traffic? The trick with UTMs, one is just being aware and using them, right? That's a huge sort of thing. It's like, now I can use UTM. That's a great thing. But immediately after that, you got to get really good at structuring them. So your emails have to be UTM'd and properly structured so that they coordinate with the Facebook traffic, which is coordinating with your Google Analytics traffic, which is coordinating from the podcast guest host traffic that you might do as a brand, or webinars and speaking events like this that I currently am doing, right? All of it's coordinated so that I can go into my GA4 and I can say, okay, which particular traffic sources are good at which specific result? Right. And this is where the magic starts to appear already, is that I can go in and I can say, okay, well, Google Organic is really good at awareness, let's say, maybe for the MeasurementMarketing Academy's journey. might say, okay, well, it looks like Google Organic is really good at awareness, but it's not really good at closing the deal, but it makes them aware. That Facebook retargeting campaign kicks in and they become leads, so they engage a little bit, but then it's the emails that are really doing a good job of closing. And so now I can start to understand how to use these traffic sources in the best way that they sort of are naturally wanting to be used. In other words, they all start to show little personalities. And I break it down to the specific ads, right? Because Facebook and a platform like Facebook or any of the paid platforms, every click that ad is bringing over should have a purpose. I am bringing and that's how we try to do it. Like, I am bringing over this audience to you for this journey to achieve this result. And then we measure that against it. Did it do its job? Right? I think about everything was like a little salesperson. Like, did it do its job? It was supposed to make them aware. Great. And then it puts them into a targeting audience that's supposed to get them to engage. And then it's supposed to, once they engage, it puts them in another audience that gets them to purchase or complete the journey. So that's the importance of tying traffic to results. And of course, when you've set up, it's what we call the setup. This is just where you have to learn a platform like GA4 and all the configuration stuff that goes into it. When you've set up your data streams, whether you're doing tag manager, all that sort of stuff, you're connecting the dots, you set up cross domain, so you have attribution going across. But when you've done all of that, you start to naturally see a story start to appear. And that's what's key. I think a lot of people with Google Analytics think that it's a matrix and they have to read the matrix, and you don't. The reason that's happening is, like, if I gave you a kid's book, right? Let's say Goldilocks and the Three Bears is a children's book. You could probably read that book just fine. Well, now if I take that book back, I rip out the pages, I rip those into pieces, and I smash them between the covers of the book, and I say, here, read me the book. Could you read the book? And the answer is yes, you could, right? Some of you thought, well, no, I couldn't read it. But I didn't change your ability to read. You still know how to read. I just made it more difficult to read. You'd have to dump out all the pieces, put them all together. Some of them are going to get lost. You got to make up some stuff and make some assumptions. Think about what happens in data in today's world. It's a lot of ripped up pieces of paper that everyone's trying to figure out how to read. And then they look at it and they go, I clearly am not a numbers person. You totally are a numbers person. It's just that it's not put together properly. So when you use a proper strategy, it is naturally going to be easier to read. And you see the stories back there. So that's the build. So once you've got your plan done, and the build is, based off to make sure you can achieve the actions we're trying to do in the plan, everything's starting to overlap on each other here. You move into that final step, which is the launch phase. We actually start using it. So how do we listen, right? That first step, we got to listen to the conversation. Just no real secret here. It's just trends and patterns, right? The truth is in the trend. The power is in the pattern. A number by itself is meaningless, right? Everybody, as numbers individuals, most of us here, we know this, right? The number itself is meaningless. The trends are everything, which is why I'm a huge believer. We always call accuracy the A word here at MeasurementMarketing.io, because I don't believe in accuracy. All of us in reality should know that. There is no accuracy, right? So the only way to get accuracy is to hire one half of the world to follow the other half of the world around. And even then you would still get their opinion of what happened, not actually what happened. So there is no accuracy. But if you measure consistently, you will see trends and patterns, and that consistency is important. So then we can see trends and patterns start to appear. So if Facebook Ads Manager is saying sales doubled, then GA4 should be saying sales doubled. I don't care if they don't match. It's not important they don't match the numbers. What's important is that those trends match. So I'm listening to the trends and patterns. Now, again, that could be as simple as, 8 to 12% of our individuals should go from offer page to maybe a cart page. And then of those, let's say 40% should complete that cart at this average purchase. And we're just looking to make sure, are we within the range of that trend, right? That's trends and patterns. Now, forecasting. You have to market forward. You don't have an option. And yet everybody is forensically, like little forensic detectives. They're always going back in time and they're asking what I think is a poor quality question. I get it. I understand it. I used to ask it too. But they're asking things like, what happened to that $10,000 we spent on Facebook last week? But what they should be asking is, what's going to happen to the $10,000 we're going to spend next week? Because if you have a proper forecast that says, okay, we're going to spend 10 grand, our CPM should be X dollars. We should have a dollar cost per click coming over. When that happens, we should have an opt-in rate between 20 and 35% for these leads. And then these leads should close within 7 days through this email series for X amount of dollars to create X amount of revenue. And you have all these steps forecasted. How can we forecast them? Because we're measuring for it, right? We've collected the information. We can see it now. So you have that forecast set up, and then we're just measuring against our forecast. But what's important now is we're not driving through the rear view mirror. We're driving through the windshield of our cars now. We're driving through the windshield. We can see what's coming. And that's how we're using measurement to say, hey, here's what next week should look like. Now, is it going to be perfect? No, of course not. You're going to see something that didn't come into play. And that's where the optimization step comes in. because you might see, hey, our CPMs were a little off and our cost per click is starting to be $2 or $3. It's higher than what we had projected. Let's go in where? Do we change the offer? No, we're changing on the ad platform, obviously, because we know it sort of dumped us in that spot. It's not matching our forecast. Now, with time, we might realize, hey, our forecast was off, and that's fine because you want to take actual data coming through. Maybe you were just too aggressive on that, and you learn that actually is going to be $2 to $3 for this new target. But maybe there's some things you can work with your vendors to improve upon, right? Same thing on the offer side, right? Let's say, and this goes back into measurement. If you think about what we can do as measurement marketers, if I have a problem where somebody's seeing like an offer page with however I'm doing that, whatever business model you have, you're presenting an offer, and I expect maybe 10% of people to go to the cart, but they're not doing that. Let's say 2% are going. What do you do? What do you fix? What actions do you take? How do you optimize that? Well, you think about this thing called expectation engine. So there's an expectation mismatch. There's something where the conversation stopped, they stopped, then left. They went, this conversation isn't the conversation I want to have anymore, and they left. But what do you do? What do you change? I don't know. So you guess. Well, I think we should change the headline. Oh, I think we should do a webinar instead. Oh, I think we should do a VSL series. I think we should change the lead. I think we should change the offer. I think we should change the price. I think we should improve the product. I think we should change the copy. And everybody starts guessing. You do not have to do that with measurement. Because if you're doing that, you just improve your measurement. You start going things like, well, what exactly is going on that page? Did they come to that offer page from whatever the ad was and then leave within 10 seconds? Okay, well, that's probably more on the ad side, right? Because we're measuring for this behavior. So they're probably more on the ad side if that's the case. But if they stayed 10 seconds or more, then the ad probably did its job. And now it's about that page copy. Did they even see your offer, right? Think about what you can do with tools like Tag Manager with GA4. And we can say, well, did they see that pricing table of our SaaS product, whatever it is? Did they see that for at least 5 or 6 seconds? In other words, did they investigate and actually think about purchasing? Well, if they did, and they didn't go to cart, that's a completely different problem than if they left within 10 seconds. And yet, if you're not measuring for this because you're not asking questions around that, you're not going to know what actions to take. And you don't naturally lead to this optimization step. So that's the whole point of a measurement strategy, is that naturally, every time you go through it, you get a little bit better, you build a little bit more measurement muscle, and you get closer and closer to being able to do this, where it just becomes natural. Like you just start knowing and you go, okay, well, where did we mismatch the expectation? Let's change that. So we had one, true story years and years ago, and it wasn't something we were trying to be tricky marketers. Somebody was going too fast on the page, and we saw this spike in our numbers within a day or so, where the offer to cart, it spiked high, really high. It was too high. We expect 8 to 12%. We were getting something like 35%. It was insane. Cart was also abandoning at a higher rate. So we went, okay, what's the conversation? The conversation is people are going to that cart page without the intention to buy. Why are they doing that? Let's go to the offer page. And what had happened is somebody was going too fast and they were playing around with the dev stuff and they hid the price accidentally. So they had deleted the price off. So of course, people were going to the cart. They had to go to the cart to figure out how much the thing was. And then they were going back to the offer page to actually see if it was worth it, right? As we all do. So that made sense. We saw that in the numbers, we fixed it, and everything came back to normal, right? Exactly. Yeah. So the numbers led us to those actions. And we could see that, oops, we're having the wrong conversation. Let's fix that. Right? Measurement to the rescue. That's why measurement's a department and not a project. So again, just to sort of put this whole thing together, we're all marketing in the blind. We are trying to get to it through just a series of actions, a series of steps to naturally produce the results we want, which is growth, right? Typically revenue and profits. So how do we do that? We ask those results and how questions. We gather the information needed. Think about your events, parameters, all that fun stuff, to be able to know that we're measuring for the behaviors to answer those questions. And then we already know, whether it's us taking the actions or somebody else, we've already workshopped with them, what actions are they going to take if the answer comes in too low, if the answer comes in too high, or if the answer is in the right range. Then at that point, we build it out. We actually start setting up our ACE results. We make sure our UTMs are coordinated and structured, so they're telling who, what, and why. And of course, we know how to use our tools properly. So we've configured it so that it's connecting the dots and there's a natural story starting to appear. At that point, we are listening to the conversation. Truth is in the trend, power is in the pattern. We're finding those trends and patterns. We are matching them against what our forecasts are for those trends and patterns. And then wherever it's not hitting the mark, we are optimizing. And we're using expectation engine to say, okay, where did we mismatch the expectation? And let's focus there. So we can have our marketers get to actions faster that are more likely to move the needle so they can get those revenue results that they so richly deserve. Now, this process, when you're first starting out, I would give yourself at least 90 days to go through it. But I want to give you a few different hints. If you are asking questions around, like, we don't even know what questions we should be asking, we're not even sure what we should measure for. If those sort of questions are happening in your organization, it is because you are skipping the planning process. So if you have no clear roadmap, definitely focus on that. And you have to do this. Don't skip planning and jump into build. It's not going to work anyway. But you've got to go through that planning process until you've got that clear roadmap. At that point, think about your reports. Do you just have chaos reports? Do you have a lot of people who are like, I know I have all the data, but I don't use the reports? Or how frustrating is that? You spend all this time with this report, you give it to somebody, they go, okay, I have no idea what to do with this. And they just leave it, right? And then they come back to you and ask questions anyway. And you're like, oh, just use these reports. Well, the reason they're not doing that is because it's chaos for them. They weren't ready for it. So if you have that plan, they've already role played how they're going to use this. That should go away. But the other thing is you've got to make sure it's got ACE results and you're tying everything together into a natural story. So instead of chaotic reports, you're actually getting useful actions from your builds, right? It sort of naturally leads you to that action step. So you can see that story. Then if you are random acts of marketing, which I think is like a Dan Kennedy term, but that whole concept of just, if everyone's too busy guessing, right? If those hippos, the highest paid person's opinion coming in there and just pushing people around, it's not data driven, right? If that's happening, it's because you're not launching it properly. You're not using what you've already built properly. So you go through these particular keys, we listen, we measure against our forecast, and that leads us to know where we're optimizing so that we know what's coming next, right? And that's how this whole process works. So with that, that is the framework. If you want to take a picture of a slide, by the way, this is the one to do it. So take your screenshots now, go through that, and I'm going to open it up to questions because I think I'm exactly at 30 minutes. Very quickly, we do have the Measurement Marketing Academy. There is a free membership level that I'm going to give you in a second that covers all of this. That actually has a deep dive strategy course that we give away because I think that is the most important stuff. I'm a big believer in that. Give away the stuff that's the most important. And this strategy course is give or take about 3 hours. It is a deep dive going through the strategy, teaching that. So you have that and you can get that for free. But what we've covered today was the measurement mindset, just to review, right? So what's the conversation? If we're not asking that, start asking that. Is it the conversation we're supposed to be having, right? So we have to think about that. That's the measurement mindset. Measurement's how we listen, marketing's how we respond. The measurement strategy, just the sort of the key points of that. If there is no KIA, remember question, information, action. If you have no plan, you are not measuring. Don't even worry about measuring. Get your KIA in place first, because the other part that's cool about the action step is if you cannot figure out an action for what you're about to measure, what's the point of measuring it? You got caught up in measuring for measurement's sake, and big data is too big now. We don't need all this data. Data is going to be a liability. It already is for a lot of us. So you don't need every single piece of data. You need useful information, right? Think ACE when it comes to the results and make sure you're measuring different stages of the customer journey, aware, complete, and as they engage. And then think about your forecast. Think, are you asking like what's going to happen next week? Can you tell your team what's going to happen next week? So that's the important part. If you're not doing that, there's a missed opportunity and you're not properly, in my opinion, expanding what measurement can do, because done well, it will tell you what's coming up next. All right. Now I mentioned the Academy before. So we have the Measurement Marketing Academy. It's a paid program with different levels for those of you that have the budgets necessary. You can absolutely invite you to join that. We have all the GA4 courses, strategy courses, tag manager, everything else. But we have a toolbox, and that's what we call our free members. We give out all of our tools to our members, and even to the free members. So we have that free option. I would definitely encourage you to do that. Either the QR code or the link below will take you there, and I look forward to seeing you back there. So with that, thank you. Happy to go into any questions that individuals may have as we go through. And then I will be in that networking room as well, so that we can have a little one-on-one if you want to do that, or a group chat.